Fate, fatalism, a fatalistic worldview. Who is in charge of your life? You or fate? In ancient Greek mythology, the three sisters of fate spin a person's destiny within 3 nights of their birth. They appear next to you between 2 and 4 a.m., the hours that belong exclusively to the newly born or to the dying. The first sister, Clotho, appears next to you. She's a maiden, young and smooth. In her hands, she holds a spindle, and on it she spins the thread of your life. Next to her is Lachesis, older, more matronly than her sister. In her hands, she holds the rod used to measure the thread of life. The length and destiny of your life is in her hands. Finally, the third sister, Atropos, old, haggardly, inevitable. In her hands, she holds the terrible shears she'll use to cut the thread of your life. She determines the time and manner of your death. In modern times, the sisters have largely disappeared from the collective consciousness, but the idea of fate hasn't. In Sophocles' play Oedipus, we encounter an important notion: the role played by fate, or the fates. This gives to the story and the vision about life that this drama presents a fatalistic quality. What exactly does this mean? What is Sophocles saying about fate? A fatalistic vision is to claim that the most important forces which create, shape, guide, reward, and afflict human life are out of human control. A fatalistic vision claims that there is something else out there. Where exactly varies from one set of beliefs to the next, but there's something else which controls the rules of our lives, determining most things of importance to us: our good and our bad fortune, our happiness, our sorrow, and above all, our death. To have a fatalistic sense of life is to hold that in this game of life, the rules, the flow of play, the success or the failure of my team, and my contributions to that are out of the control of human beings. The outcome and all the various stages of the game are determined by non-human forces. We may have no accurate idea of why fate works the way it does, although differing fatalistic visions will provide different senses of just how much we can know and deal with fate. But at least with a fatalistic vision, it states that there is something out there controlling what goes on. To assert that chance rules all things, as Iocaста does in the play, is to claim that there is little we can do to control things and nothing we can learn about it, since the concept of chance suggests that what occurs is quite arbitrary, unrelated to any higher system of order or meaning. The term fate and fatalist do assert that something or someone is in control, and hence the universe does not operate by chance. Take a minute, make sure you have a good definition of fate right now. Pause the video, go back and review if you need to. Fate. This definition of fate is clear enough, but such fatalism is profoundly different from what we believe nowadays. Thus, books that hold a fatalistic view, which include most books up until the 18th century, including Oedipus, can provide difficulties for us, especially since a fatalistic view of life challenges some of our most cherished beliefs about the ability of the individual to succeed, and it can make us profoundly uncomfortable, which makes such books uniquely valuable to us. To provide some way of thinking about or picturing such fatal forces in our modern world, we name them. Hence arises, according to many scholars of myth, the entire concept of divinity or a divine family. Superhuman personalities who may or may not have human forms and attributes, who control the rules and the events of our lives according to their own principles, which may or may not be intelligible or understandable to us. Naming fate is a necessary imaginative act, for it permits the human subject of such fate to understand his or her situation, at least a little bit better. This construct makes this aspect of human life emotionally understandable, allowing us to explain and accept the game that we are in. It permits us to establish a relationship with the controlling forces of our existence. Such relationships often form the basis for personal or communal religious practices and institutions, especially if I believe such fatal presence do listen and can sometimes be persuaded by maybe prayer or sacrifice or penance or so on. An example. Let's say there is an unexpected sudden death, a death of a child even. At once the family searches for answers, for an explanation. Why did this disaster have to happen? What in the best of all possible worlds could justify such an unwelcome event? After searching through medical data, maybe if it's an illness, or police reports, if it were an accident, the best explanation folks often settle on is, the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Even for less religious people, this explanation, as unsatisfactory as many may find it, can be enormously consoling. The child died because that's what fate, destiny, the Lord, Allah, or whatever one chooses to call it, had so determined. The event then becomes not simply fortuitous or chance or unexplainable. One is able to put a name and a personality on the disaster. One may not be able to overcome such tragedy with simple human reason, but can at least make the disaster emotionally understandable within the framework of a supportable belief system. Think about what other kinds of disasters or occurrences compel people to use this kind of explanation. Like hurricanes, tornadoes, coronavirus, cancer, maybe even job loss, other kinds of personal tragedies. To call a worldview fatalist or to believe in fate is not necessarily to characterize that fate as having any particular form. For example, a worldview might present fate as very pessimistic, non-human, irrational, malignant forces or personalities which have little love for human beings and delight in human suffering and death. Or a fatalistic worldview might be very benevolent and friendly. If I attend carefully to what they demand, I may lead a generally satisfying life, perhaps even gaining eternal happiness in a hereafter. Both of these views are equally fatalistic, for they both share the sense that there is no human control over the rules and no method humans can devise for changing the rules. But they differ profoundly on how they view such fatal rules, the first being much more pessimistic than the second. Thus, fatalism, or a fatalistic view of life, does not mean that human beings have no freedom. The fates, or God, or Allah, if I characterize my fatalistic vision in that manner, may indeed control all of the rules and determine the good and the bad things that happen to me, including my own death. But I am free to adopt towards that fate whatever attitude I choose. In other words, how I confront my fate is my free choice, the way in which I exercise my human freedom. Oedipus is not compelled or forced to act the way he does. He freely chooses to initiate the chain of events which eventually reveals his fate to him. That's his free will. He has been told that he is fated to kill his father and marry his mother, and he has refused to accept that fate. He has spent much of his life moving around to avoid that fate. In other words, he has freely chosen, for reasons that we can certainly understand and applaud, to construct a life in which what he has been told will happen will not happen. He leaves his hometown. He leaves his family forever to avoid his fate. And so far as he can tell, he has been spectacularly successful. In doing what he has done, Oedipus believes that a man or a woman does not have to freely accept an unwelcome fate, and one, moreover, which is morally abhorrent to him and to the play's audience. That man or woman is in control. This fact, once again, gives him powerful reasons for feeling very confident in his own abilities. In his mind, he is a human being who has thwarted fate, although he is still very worried that it still might eventually happen. We, of course, we readers, we know otherwise. So throughout the play, there is this powerful sense of irony at work, an irony which manifests itself in what Oedipus thinks is the case and what we audience members know is the case. We understand why he sees the world and himself the way he does. He thinks he has done great things, and he has, and we can applaud him for that. At the same time, we know he's wrong. He is deceived about his relationship to the world. his power over the world. In that sense, he is blind, which is a really important metaphor here. The very name Oedipus, which means either swollen foot or knowledge of one's foot, it's a constant reminder of this ironic tension. Here, the greatest of men, famous for his insight into the mysteries of life, solving the riddle of the Sphinx, taking on the challenge of this new plague in his city. He's blind to the significance of his own name, which is an obvious clue to his past. The ironic tension continues to build as the play goes on. The clues about the real murderer accumulate, yet Oedipus persists in believing he cannot be the one, even though he remembers killing a man at a road junction. And so, in his ignorance, he redoubles his efforts, resisting all urges from Iocosta, his wife, to abandon the investigation. He has to see this matter through, because that's the sort of man he is. Finding the truth is more important than his own suffering. Is that greatness? What we witness here is a strongly pessimistic vision of fate. Here we have the best of men, the most knowledgeable, the most successful, and we could argue the best intentioned, who sets out to save his own city. And in a very fundamental way, Oedipus is entirely innocent. He did not choose to murder his father or marry his mother. But even such a man, for all his excellence and past success, cannot know his fate. But the course of events which leads him to discover the truth about himself has been freely initiated and maintained throughout by himself, his free will. And so this vision of life here is very mysterious, very cruel, very pessimistic. Even the best and most innocent of men, the best intentioned of men, it seems to say, one who has striven to live the best life possible, even leaving his parents and family, he endures to find out the truth about who he really is and what his life really amounts to. And he's going to be horrified to find it out. Oedipus' fate is not linked to some sin he has committed. Here, fate is punishing him arbitrarily and mercilessly. This kind of view causes the Chorigus to say at the end, better not to be than live a blind man. But we are all blind when it comes to our fate. I stress this point about the importance of free will, about attitude in a fatalistic universe. The quality of being human in stories like Oedipus comes not from the extent to which the hero controls his or her own destiny or fate, which is ultimately in the hands of other forces, according to Sophocles, but it comes from the attitude that he or she adopts in the face of a fatal destiny. There's a video underneath this video that shares about Stuart Scott. Stuart Scott was an ESPN reporter. He's going to talk about his attitude about fate. View that video and then come back to watch the second half of this lecture.